All right, everyone. Welcome. In the entire world of business, there's one structure that truly stands above all others, and that's the corporation. But what does that word really mean? It's so much more than just a big building or a famous brand. It's a really powerful legal and financial tool, and it's the engine that shapes our entire global economy. So today, we're going to break it all down. We're going to get into how corporations work, from the ground up, how they raise money, how they manage risk, and how they create just immense wealth. So let's start with a question. Think about it. What's the real difference between, say, your favorite local pizza shop and a global behemoth like Apple or Google? It's not just about the size or the number of employees, right? The secret, the real answer, lies in a core legal and accounting concept that allows for unbelievable levels of investment and, frankly, the kind of massive risk-taking that fuels our entire modern world. So let's dive in and unpack that.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the absolute basics, what a corporation actually is in the eyes of the law. From there, we'll explore its single most important feature, which is limited liability. Then we'll look at the different flavors of corporations you're going to encounter out there. And then we get to the fun part. We're going to put you in the CEO's seat to see how these concepts play out in a very real decision. And we'll finish up by looking at some common financial traps you'll want to avoid.
First up, this is the big one. The whole idea of a corporation as a separate legal person. Now, I know that sounds a little strange, maybe a bit abstract, but trust me, it is the absolute foundation of everything else we're going to discuss today.
Now, look closely at that phrase on the slide, separate from its owners. This is where all the magic happens. The law literally treats a corporation as if it were its own person. Think about that. It can own property, it can sign contracts, it can borrow money, it can even be sued, all in its own name. The owners, who we call shareholders because they hold shares of ownership, are completely distinct from this legal entity. This legal fiction, as it's sometimes called, is truly the engine of modern capitalism.
And this slide right here perfectly captures that critical difference. Let's go back to our pizza shop owner. As a sole proprietor, that owner is the business. There's no separation. If the business goes into debt, well, so does the owner, personally. That's what we call unlimited personal liability. And believe me, that is a terrifying thought for any entrepreneur. But the corporation, it creates this protective wall, this legal barrier. And that separation, that wall, leads us directly to the corporation's greatest advantage. Its superpower, really, limited liability. And I want you to understand, this isn't just some dry accounting term. It's a powerful incentive that fundamentally encourages people to invest their money and take the kinds of risks that lead to innovation. Let's see exactly how it works with a real scenario.
So let's consider a pretty common and very unfortunate business situation. You have an individual owner. They've poured their heart, their soul, their life savings into this business. They've even taken out loans to expand. But then a market downturn hits and the business becomes insolvent. It can't pay its bills.
Because there's no legal separation, the creditors can come after the owner's personal assets. I'm talking about their house, their car, their retirement savings. It is all on the table. This is the incredibly harsh reality of unlimited personal liability. And it's a huge reason why it's so difficult and so risky to try and scale a business as a sole proprietor.
Okay, now let's rewind. Let's look at the exact same failure. Same industry, same $500,000 debt, but this time, the business was structured as a corporation right from the start.
And here's the game changer. That legal shield is now in full effect. The corporation, as its own separate legal person, is the one that owes the debt. Now sure, creditors can seize the corporation's assets, its bank accounts, its equipment, but they absolutely cannot touch the personal assets of the shareholders. The most a shareholder can possibly lose is the amount they originally invested to buy their shares. Their home is safe, their savings are safe, and that protection is what makes people willing to invest in new, sometimes very risky ventures.
Right, but it's important to know that not all corporations are the same. They actually come in a few different forms, and each one has its own specific set of rules and a unique purpose. As a future business leader, you absolutely need to understand these distinctions. This table really breaks it down nicely, and these differences are critical. So you have public corporations, think Apple, think Google, whose shares are traded on a public stock exchange like the New York Stock Exchange. This means they can raise enormous sums of money from the general public. But it also means they are under intense scrutiny. They have to file very detailed financial statements with regulatory bodies like the SEC. Then you have private corporations. These are owned by a much smaller group, maybe a family or a few investors, and their shares are not traded publicly. This gives them a lot more privacy and flexibility, but it also makes it much harder to raise huge amounts of capital. And finally, you've got nonprofits, which are just a fascinating structure. They're set up like a corporation, but they exist for a mission: charitable, educational, you name it. They technically have no owners, and any surplus revenue they generate has to be reinvested back into that mission. It cannot be distributed as profit.
Okay, so how does all this theory actually play out in the real world? Let's move from the textbook to the boardroom and put you in the CEO's chair of a large public company.
So here's the situation. You're faced with a pretty high-stakes decision. From a pure mathematical standpoint, you might say the expected value is zero, right? A 50% shot at making $1 million, a 50% shot at losing $1 million. A sole proprietor, with their personal wealth on the line, would almost certainly refuse this bet. It's just too risky. But you're the CEO of a corporation. How does this structure change your perspective on this risk?
Well, that corporate shield changes absolutely everything. As the CEO, you know that $1 million loss, while not great, is not going to bankrupt your thousands of shareholders personally. Your primary fiduciary duty, your legal and ethical obligation, is to maximize their return over the long term. And that means you have to take calculated risks. See, as a CEO, you're not just making one single bet. You're managing a whole portfolio of them. And some will fail, but some will succeed spectacularly. This is precisely why corporations are the ones building satellite networks and developing life-saving medicines. They are literally built to take bold bets on the future.
Okay, now for a very critical lesson. Let's talk about a common mistake, a misunderstanding that I see trip up even experienced business people. Understanding the limits of limited liability is absolutely crucial for making smart financial decisions.
This is such a dangerous assumption to make. Let me be very clear. Limited liability protects your personal assets from the corporation's debts. It does not protect your investment in the corporation itself. If the business fails, your shares could, and very often, do become completely worthless. Your investment can absolutely go to zero.
So, to avoid this trap, I want you to always remember these 3 steps. Think of it as a mental checklist. First, acknowledge the shield. Understand the protection it offers your personal wealth. Second, you still have to assess the business risk. That means digging into the company's financial health, its market position, its operations. And third, and this is key, always keep a clear mental separation between the shareholders' risk, which is the potential loss of your investment, and the corporation's risk, which is total failure. They are related for sure, but they are not the same thing. So, if there's one thing you take away from this entire discussion, let it be this. The corporation is one of the most brilliant risk management tools ever invented. It's what allows us to pool capital from thousands, even millions of investors to fund ventures that would be far too risky for any single person to take on. Understanding this distinction, that the goal is to manage risk by limiting it to the capital invested, not to eliminate it, that is the secret to sound financial analysis. So, I'll leave you with this. The next time you're reading the news and you see a story about a major corporate merger or a huge investment in some new technology or even a big bankruptcy, I want you to remember the principles we've discussed today. This idea of the separate legal person and the power of limited liability. These are the invisible forces that are constantly shaping our business world. This is the very framework of modern capitalism.